Sometimes, the things we crave the most are the ones we can never have. That's what I told myself the first time I kissed my boss. Nathan Calloway wasn't just my superior. He was the kind of man who could own a room without saying a word. Sharp suits, a smooth baritone voice, eyes that could pin you to the spot. He carried himself with a quiet authority, a presence that made people listen. I'd admired him from the moment I walked into the firm, but admiration turned into something more dangerous the night we stayed late at the office. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk. Papers lay scattered between us, the remnants of a long, grueling day. I should have gone home hours ago, but there was something about the silence, the intimacy of an empty office, that made the air between us feel different, charged. "You've been working too hard," Nathan said, his voice softer than usual. He leaned back in his chair, undoing the top button of his shirt. "You deserve a break." I laughed, trying to ignore the way his gaze lingered on me. "And you don't." He didn't answer. Instead, he studied me, really studied me, like he was considering something dangerous. And then, without warning, he leaned in. I felt the heat of him before I felt his lips, the briefest hesitation before he closed the space between us. The kiss was unexpected, intoxicating. My pulse pounded as his hands slid against my waist, pulling me closer. For a moment, the world outside the office didn't exist. No rules, no consequences, just this. Just us. But reality came rushing back as fast as it had vanished. He pulled away, breath uneven, fingers still gripping the fabric of my shirt. "This is a mistake," he murmured, as if trying to convince himself. I should have agreed. I should have stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of that office like nothing had happened. But I didn't, because even as he spoke those words, his body betrayed him. His hand lingering on my wrist, his pupils blown wide. He didn't want to stop. Neither did I. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know." We left it at that. No promises, no confessions, just the quiet understanding that we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. The next morning, Nathan was as composed as ever, stern, professional, unreadable. If anyone noticed the way his fingers twitched when they brushed against mine in passing, they didn't say a word. But I noticed, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Secrets have a way of growing, of taking root in the spaces between words, in the stolen glances that last a second too long. Nathan and I never spoke about that first kiss, but neither of us could forget it. It was as if something had been unlocked between us, a door neither of us dared to close. It started subtly, a lingering touch when he handed me a file, the warmth of his palm against mine for just a beat too long, the way his gaze would flicker to me during meetings, sharp and knowing, sending a shiver down my spine. The moments stretched between us like an unspoken language, one only we understood. Then came the nights. Late hours at the office became our excuse. Everyone else had gone home, but Nathan and I stayed, buried in work that no longer mattered. Some nights we barely spoke, just the rhythmic scratching of pens against paper, the occasional sigh of exhaustion. But even in the silence, I felt the tension, the pull between us tightening like a drawn bowstring. One evening, he stood behind me, watching as I typed. His presence was a weight against my back, solid, unmistakable. "You're good at what you do," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. I turned, only to find him closer than expected. His breath was warm against my cheek, his hand resting lightly on the edge of my desk. It would have been so easy to lean in, to close the distance like we had before. Instead, I forced a smile. "I learned from the best." His lips twitched, but there was something guarded in his expression, something almost hesitant. I told myself it didn't matter, that I could handle this, whatever this was. But the deeper we sank into our secret world, the more I realized I wasn't just playing a game. I was falling. And Nathan was always careful. He was passionate in the dark, reckless when no one was looking, but in daylight he was composed, professional, detached. The first time I tried to reach for his hand outside the safety of closed doors, he pulled away. The first time I suggested grabbing dinner at a restaurant instead of his apartment, he hesitated. And yet, every night, he would whisper my name like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. I wanted to believe he was just scared, that what we had meant something real. But doubt had started to creep in, quiet but insistent. One afternoon, a coworker joked, "Nathan's impossible to read." Huh? You ever wonder if he's seeing someone? I laughed, but inside the question festered, because for all the nights I spent in his arms, for all the stolen moments and secret touches, I had no idea where I really stood, and I was beginning to fear the answer. Secrets thrive in the dark, but the truth always finds a way to the surface. I should have known ours wouldn't stay hidden forever. It started with an email. An anonymous message landed in my inbox late one evening, the subject line blank, the body containing only a single attachment. My heart pounded as I clicked it open. A photo, blurry, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Nathan, not in his office, not alone. He was outside a small cafe, seated across from another man. Their hands were intertwined on the tabletop, their faces close, lost in conversation. And then, as if the universe had chosen that exact moment to twist the knife, Nathan leaned forward and kissed him. The ground beneath me tilted. I read the email again, though there were no words, just the photo, damning in its simplicity. My stomach clenched as I stared at the timestamp. Last night, the same night Nathan had told me he was too busy to see me. Cold anger replaced the initial shock. I closed my laptop, grabbed my coat, and left. Nathan was still in his office when I arrived, the glow of his desk lamp casting shadows against the walls. He barely looked up as I stepped inside. "Working late," he murmured, like nothing had changed. I threw my phone onto his desk, the screen still lit with the photo. "Explain." His expression flickered, shock, then something else. Something almost resigned. "Where did you get that? That's what you care about?" My voice was sharp, edged with disbelief. "Not the fact that you've been lying to me this whole time?" Nathan exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. He didn't deny it. He didn't rush to explain. He just sat there, studying me like I was some problem he hadn't figured out how to solve. "I never made you any promises," he said at last. I recoiled, as if struck. "Are you serious?" He stood, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he admitted. "I didn't plan it, but He hesitated. "I care about you, just not enough," I finished for him. The words were bitter on my tongue. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I warned, voice trembling. "I was never your choice, was I? Just something convenient, something easy." Nathan said nothing, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. A slow, hollow ache settled in my chest as I turned toward the door. I had given him my time, my trust, my heart, and in return, I had been nothing more than a secret, a fleeting indulgence. But I refused to be that anymore. I left without another word. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan didn't stop me. Heartbreak doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in quiet moments. Waking up alone in a bed that still smells like him. Reaching for a phone that stays silent. Walking through the office and realizing the air between us has changed forever. The first few weeks were the hardest. I replayed every conversation, every touch, searching for the moment I should have known. Had it been the way he hesitated when I suggested going out in public? The way he pulled back when I reached for his hand? The way he never said my name outside the walls of his apartment? I resigned a month later. Not because of him, at least that's what I told myself. But the truth was, I couldn't stand the suffocating weight of his presence. The careful way he avoided my gaze. The whispered office gossip I wasn't supposed to hear. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I found a new job, one where no one knew my past, where I wasn't defined by the shadow of a man who had never really been mine. I threw myself into work, into late nights at the gym, into anything that would keep my mind from wandering back to him. But healing isn't just about moving on. It's about facing the truth. Months later, Nathan reached out. A simple message. Can we talk? For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But I knew that wouldn't bring me closure. And so, against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where no one paid attention to familiar faces. He looked the same, perfectly put together, unreadable as ever. But there was something different in his eyes. I made a mistake, he said, fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. I never meant to hurt you. I sighed, folding my hands on the table. Then why did you? Nathan exhaled slowly. I was scared, he admitted. Scared of what it meant, of how real it felt. I thought I could keep it contained. I thought. He stopped, shaking his head. I don't know what I thought. I studied him, searching for something, regret, sincerity, maybe even hope. And for a brief second, I wondered what I would have done if he had said this months ago. If he had chosen me when it mattered. But I wasn't that person anymore. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind he was hoping for. I used to think you were the best thing that ever happened to me, I admitted. Now I know you were just something I had to survive. Nathan flinched, but he didn't argue. When I walked away, the weight I had carried for so long finally lifted. Not because I had won him back, but because I finally realized I never needed to.